Good morning, since afternoon. Good afternoon. One of the things that I've gotten some comments about is hearing more about learning strategies and time management, and that's what we are going to talk about today. And I want to emphasize the word learning strategies, as opposed to the somewhat more common phrase studying strategies. And studying to me calls to mind myself or somebody else, like looking, like sitting at a desk with my hair in my hand, like clutching too strongly, like just trying to get the words or the equations or whatever to get forced into my brain. And I don't think that's the best model for how we want to approach learning. And so what are some sort of ground rules? We're going to talk about tips and tactics and time management, little life hacks that we can use later on. But what are some ground rules that we need to internalize before we even get that far? Yep.
No distraction.
No distractions. I would put that in the, yeah, that's certainly what we want. I would put that a little bit in the tips and tricks bit, but you're right. Like if we are distracted, we're not going to be able to do anything. So one of my favorite tricks is to take my phone and turn it all the way off. Or if I'm reading something, take my laptop and turn it all the way off, so that there's that little bit of barrier to getting going again. What I wanted to tell you, though, was a little bit more of a philosophical bit. Even if you're not distracted, even if your phone is off, even if you are going to spend 30 minutes of complete attention to the work at hand, which is learning something from your course material, how do you know, how are you going to try to get the most out of that? And in professor school, just kidding, there's no such thing. We never learned how to teach. But in professor school, they teach you to teach from the top down. What does teaching from the top down mean? Teaching from the top down means that we are going to try to create the buckets in the students' minds into which all the facts and the details get filled in. Why do we want those buckets? Because we want a framework for where all that stuff is going to go. Because if you just start throwing out details, it's going to sluice through the buckets and onto the floor or into the lake or wherever. We're not going to collect any of that because we don't know where any of it goes. We don't know how to categorize it. And let me tell you that the way that most courses are taught don't have any buckets. Like, it's all details. And you're very inclined to want to forget stuff. It's just human nature. If you can't categorize it, if you can't add it to your framework of how the world works or how your field or your profession works, then it's not going to land where it needs to go. So in the cases where a professor, where an instructor is not very good at teaching from the top down, or the structure of the course does not really allow enough time for teaching from the top down, you need to learn from the top down. That means figuring out what is relevant about what you're learning, so that when you learn it, you know where it goes and you know where it fits into the framework. Let me give you an example. My undergraduate degree is in chemistry. My PhD is in chemistry. And when you take chemistry in high school, you learn, you kind of have this idea. What's the definition of chemistry? Chemistry is the structure and property of matter and the changes that it undergoes. But all you do in chemistry is balance equations and do titrations and learn about something called van der Waals forces, which is how argon atoms interact. And like, I haven't learned the first thing about the structure and property of matter and the changes that it undergoes. let's take van der Waals forces as an example. It's a weak force that is responsible for how you get liquid nitrogen, how nitrogen collapses, condenses into a liquid. Okay, that is true. But van der Waals forces, we are built up of van der Waals forces. There's no chain of chemical bonds that runs from my toe to my head. It's like all van der Waals forces. Like it explains pretty much everything about atmospheric chemistry, about global warming and partitioning of gases. It explains everything about biology and how a cell can stay stable even though it's mostly solid material. It's like one of the most important things, and we teach it at such the detailed level that you lose sight of why exactly you should care about that. So if these kinds of things, and the same is true in a lot of reasons, like why is the political system in the US the way it is? Well, or why do we have the kind of politics that we have right now? Well, you can take a history class and you can learn about the, you know, Roman Empire, and then you can learn about the Middle Ages, then you can learn about the Renaissance and, exploration and conflict and the rise of the nation state and World War One and partitioning and decolonialization and World War Two, and then we get to, Joe Biden being president. But without putting things into context, then none of that other stuff, there's no motivation for learning it unless you're just really interested in history, right? It's the same thing in almost every field of learning. You'll be more motivated to learn those details if you know what the framework is and how it fits in. So how is it that you develop this framework? There's never been a better time to learn about the connection between what you're learning in class and where it manifests in the real world. How should you do this? Ask your professor, first of all, if they're not doing it. But if you're on your phone or your laptop, you ask ChatGPT. You ask Google. You put it into YouTube. You go to Veritasium or some science or technology creator, and you use these keywords and say, how is this relevant to everyday life? And that will help you find some of the things that you're interested in and take a deep dive in them and see if eventually you get down to some of those key words that you're learning about in class, where you're learning about all the details. That will help you make sense of it. I'm not one of those people who can just go into a class, learn a bunch of details, and expect to be able to repeat it without knowing what the context is, like why I should care about it. I'm definitely not one of those people. And, I'm 40 years old. I haven't been in a formal classroom in a long time, but I use this trick all the time. And because I work in an environment where I do manage a professional staff, I do research, I do teaching, I'm interested in how theories of learning and memory affect the way that facts get stuck in people's minds. So I have that motivation to learn more of the theory. So I'll even pick up a textbook, and lately I've been looking at MCAT review books because there's a lot of really good stuff on there in classes that I've never taken. And anyway, so I'll read the behavioral science MCAT textbook, and I'll treat it like like a learning exercise, but I'm not in class, but I'm sort of making my own curriculum to make what I do on a day-to-day basis make more sense, or to enrich what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And It does take some effort, especially when you're in class and you have deadlines. You're taking 12, 16, 20 units and you have homework deadlines and so on, but it is worthwhile. It's well worth the effort to step back, look at the context, look at the framework for why you're interested in these details, and then going to class and having the motivation to learn will sort of slot in. So how do you do this? So learning from the top down as opposed to bottom up. Bottom up is learning about titrations and van der Waals forces and acid-base chemistry and reaction kinetics and delta G equals delta H minus T delta S and all that stuff from high school chemistry. That's bottom up. That is not going to work for 99% of people. It's certainly not going to work for me. You might be good at doing it because you like manipulating equations or whatever, but it's not going to motivate you in as deep a sense as if you're learning from the top down, which is what is the context. It makes you curious. It stokes your curiosity. If you're curious about something, why is, pick some topic in your academics or even in your everyday life. I'm just going to keep picking chemistry examples until someone tells me that's annoying. Stop. Why is water liquid even though it's basically just like an oxygen atom with two little Mickey Mouse head hydrogen atoms sticking out of it? Like why? It's so low molecular weight. Why would it be a liquid at room temperature? So this stokes your curiosity. You're solving puzzles by learning these facts. But in order to make that make sense, you need to know what the context is. So you have some kind of intrinsic motivation to learn it. So what are some tactics here? Just ask ChatGPT, YouTube, your TAs, your professors, your profs. Ask your professors, ask your staff, ask your instructional staff. Another thing I want to tell you about, sort of at the root of your whole approach to learning, or an effective approach to learning, is something called metacognition. Metacognition is meta. That's so meta. Metacognition is cognition about cognition. And specifically, it's about how you know how your own brain works. It's how you know, what form of information are you most likely to retain something or to make a connection? Is it through pictures, words, audio? So there's some amount of self-reflection. Knowing about knowing that humans are inconsistent. Inconsistent, what do I mean inconsistent? Inconsistent means I always have my favorite time of day is first thing in the morning. First thing in the morning is when most people, I would say more than half of people, are not morning people. I tend to be a morning person. I like to get my day started by doing some relatively important task fairly, by 10 or something, which means I can put a couple hours into it. And there's a time around 2 p.m., this is not uncommon, when I want to sleep. When I don't have much cognitive energy, And so there are low value tasks that I can do, like things like responding to emails, like doing some like doing some kind of organization or I need to put files in a certain place or I need to get something moving that I'm the bottleneck on, like some team project or something like that. And those tasks, they're fine tasks. They tend to be little discrete things that don't take too much cognitive effort. They're not hugely creative. They're the kinds of things that you could be doing while watching TV. As students, sometimes you might find an evening. There are types of tasks that you can do with certain other stimuli. Like, I could always do math problems to music, but I can't do any reading or writing to music. Other people are not that way. But there's something about rhythm and syncopation that even help my quantitative reasoning ability, such as it is, 20 years out of school, where reading, somehow it uses the same parts of my cortex. So I can't read and listen to music, especially if it has lyrics, but even if it doesn't, I can't do it. It just takes up too much bandwidth. So know what times of day you are good at different tasks. And you'll do this anyway. The point is, don't beat yourself up for it. If you can't do this task at a particular time of day, like, it's okay. Between 8 and 10 tomorrow, I know, based on past experience, that I'll be ready to do it then. So this is about the timing and cognitive load. Okay, now we're going to drill down a little bit more into actionable tactics, less about this philosophy stuff. Homework. So success in homework leads to success in exams. The B way to do things is to get the homework assignment and just do the homework assignment. Do what you need to get to do a good job on the homework assignment. Even to get an A on the homework assignment. And it's all self-contained. You're like, okay, I'll just use my class notes and the book assignment or the book reading if applicable to do this assignment. The way and then, okay, say you got an A on the homework, but then you might be missing some of the context. And when you have another form of assessment, like an exam where you don't have your other resources available, then you may be missing some of the components that require you to kind of step out of the box and do some of those harder exam problems. So maybe there's an exam problem or an exam prompt where you lose some points because you did kind of just a plain old good job here, but not an exceptional job. However, let's take math for example, because how many of you have taken like calculus or something in the calc series? Okay, so you have this problem set. The problem set, the first time you look at it, is hard. It's hard. And because the problem set is focused on maybe not the most difficult problems that could have been assigned or that could have been written by the instructor, but almost the most difficult ones that could have been assigned by the instructor. So the strategy is to start earlier in the book in terms of difficulty. So you start start with the drill problems. This is like, it could be in the book, it could be past exams that they've given, if the instructor has given out, past homework assignments that they've given out, but make sure that there's an answer, ideally a whole solution. Make sure that there's a whole solution available. This is drill. Then the strategy is, after you've done this drill, and maybe it's one step to get to the answer, or 2 steps to get to the answer, then it's 3 steps to get to the answer. Then when you get to the homework problems that were assigned, then it's where it's 3 or 4 complicated steps to get to the answer. Then you have all this momentum. It's like, I don't know, driving through a snow drift if your driveway's not plowed. Totally random analogy, especially irrelevant in Southern California. But anyway, you're just plowing into the driveway. You've got the momentum, and yeah, you're in the driveway because you've done all this drill, and you're putting everything together in increments. Then when you get to the homework problems that were actually assigned, you really understand them. You can really do them efficiently, and then you've done all that training. You've built all those synapses in your brain. Then when you get to the exam, it's going to be easier. And then that's how to turn an A homework assignment into an A performance on the exam. Does it take more time? Yes, it does take more time. But maybe not as much more time as you think. Because if you're trying to do just what's assigned on the homework and you're only using what's there and what's in your notes to do the hard problems or to do the hard prompts or essay questions, then you're spinning your wheels a lot. You're not really making progress toward solving that problem. What's your relationship with the textbook? Hopefully, there is a book. Oh, I want to say one more thing because it's so 2023. If there are no problems in the book, or there's no book, or you don't have access to previous exam problems, start a file in ChatGPT on each course and say, this is what we're studying now. You can even, double tap control or whatever so you can dictate it into ChatGPT and say, this is what we're studying now in this course. Based on what you know in this chapter and this topic, give me 5 problems or prompts and 5 solutions. And it will do it automatically. And most of them will be pretty good. The more quantitative this is, the more difficult it is for ChatGPT to do it. But chances are for most undergraduate, like intro-ish classes, it will be pretty good. It will be really good in computer science. It'll be really good in like literature, humanities, social sciences. Don't ask it to do too much arithmetic because it'll get a lot of that wrong. But in general, if you're, manipulating, equations and stuff, it'll do that part, but it won't do the arithmetic right. So that's a really good strategy now to like generate practice problems and to see what sorts of responses it would get. And then of course you can critique those yourselves. The better you get at it, you're like, I don't think the language model quite got this the way I would say it. And that's fine. The more you find like that, the better analytical skills you are developing. Okay, so the relationship with the book. Read ahead of time. How many of you are in STEM majors? So in STEM majors, we have this thing of, I come from a STEM background, and we have this thing called active learning, and we're so proud of ourselves for inventing it. inventing it, which is if you read the book ahead of time, you'll understand what we're talking about in class and we can do problems. But we kind of forgot about the fact that every other major has been doing that for hundreds of years. Because who would go to a literature class without having read the book? I mean, yeah, sometimes you're busy, you don't read it. But the class makes literally no sense if people don't come in at the same level of understanding. So if you're in a STEM major or you're in a STEM class and reading is not enforced like it would be in a, in a history class or a literature class, make sure to read ahead of time and ask the instructor, say if they don't tell you in the syllabus, what part of the book should I be focusing on before this lecture? Write in it. It doesn't mean that you're going to go back and look at all of these notes that you make, but what does it do? It slows you down, which is a good thing. It slows you down. It lets stuff sink in better. Picture the book as a mystery or courtroom drama. You will have characters and concepts that pop up. You'll be able to ask the book questions that you have from your class. Like the professor or the TA kept saying this concept, this word, I don't understand what that means. The book is like your expert witness. And if the book's not good enough, someone on YouTube described it. ChatGPT can probably describe it. Use your learning strategy with the book and also your class notes as a means of asking questions. You're planting flags in the material where come heck or high water, I say hell, right? Come hell or high water, you will find the answer to that question. If it's not in the book or you don't understand the book's explanation, that's fine. There are a million other ways to find it. You ask a classmate, you ask the TA, you ask the professor, you ask ChatGPT. Really outsourcing the whole university enterprise to ChatGPT. I understand that. Sorry, I use it all the time myself. Anyway, such a useful tool. What a time to be alive. Transfer your notes to flashcards. This goes with the book. So notes, I'm going to add the homework here. So you take the homework and the book and your notes and you transfer to flashcards. I used to take, when I was an undergrad at Boston University studying chemistry, I used to take scrap paper and I would just like scribble stuff down, like scribble my notes and my questions down on the scratch paper. I would copy over stuff. I would just to try to get stuff from my brain through my writing hand or whatever. And then I realized that I was just making these sloppy notes and kind of just trashing them or recycling them. And then I realized if I put them on note cards and it take a little bit more effort to make them nice and legible, and I could take them on the subway. I could take them on the bus. I could walk around with them. And once I kind of got used to, yeah, I know what that one's going to say, I'll put that one in another pile. It's kind of amazing how quickly you can retain information when you kind of gamify it in the way of a flashcard. And it's like totally, Victorian era, medieval era technology, but it's super useful. Do you have to do all these things? No. Did I do all of these things? No. Does it take a lot of time? Yes. You sometimes not have the time to do it? Yes. But each time you remember to use a deliberate learning strategy, which is not just staring at the page at a random time of day and expecting all of that knowledge to create synapses in your brain. Anytime you're doing anything at all that involves a more active learning style, the better. Because all of that time with your hand in your hand, expecting things to be understood just by looking at them, that time is mostly wasted. That time is mostly wasted time. And there's a big continuum between doing that and anything that involves active learning, active association, learning from the top down, learning something on the internet about what you're learning so you know where it fits, copying stuff over to flashcards, taking those flashcards out, treating it like a courtroom drama, treating everything in your learning kit as an expert witness in putting together a theory of the case. A couple of even lower level tips that you might find useful. Some of you have been watching the video or the podcast that's recorded automatically of this class. So audio, you can take this information with you while you're brushing your teeth, or while you are cooking or doing the dishes or walking around. And sometimes hearing the information in a different form helps you to lock it in place. It takes 2 points to make a line. Sometimes I like to think where it takes 2 form factors of seeing the information, whether it's reading it or hearing it or seeing it in a picture or in a video, and then a few days later you see it or hear it or see it in a picture or video, and they're different forms, but it's the same fact. Then it locks it in place a lot more strongly, and there's a lot of good neurological evidence for why this is, these recency effects in learning. So audio, super convenient. I do this all the time. In fact, while preparing for this lecture, I gave a talk 5 years ago to grad students and postdocs on time management. And I'm like, what did I say back then? I'm like, okay, some of that's good to repeat, but this is a different audience. ChatGPT didn't exist back then. There's a lot of differences. So I'm like, I'm only going to use maybe 5% of this content is relevant, but it was good to have access to that audio. There are course podcasts on podcast.ucsd.edu, and sometimes those can be really helpful to use. There are also free podcasts. I mentioned that there was one time in my life, an embarrassingly short time ago, where I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I took a leave of absence and went to medical school? And the idea was I wanted to be my own medical collaborator on NIH grants, because as a PhD scientist, I sometimes get dinged by, oh, you can't show the clinical relevance of this research. You need to have a collaborator who's a clinician. I'm like, what if I was the researcher and the clinician? And so after a very short amount of time, I gave up on that idea because there's no way that I want to be a medical student. But I also did some background reading because I wanted to know more about like what a doctor did. So I got the MCAT books that I mentioned. I got a bunch of U.S. medical licensing exam like prep books, and I also found these podcasts and YouTube channels that were and audio books that were for the U.S. medical licensing exam or the MCAT if you go, earlier upstream. And there's so much good distilled information in course content that people have already created, and a lot of it is free. A lot of it is free. Especially free stuff. But, sometimes if you're going to pay thousands of dollars for a 4-unit course, maybe you want to pay $15 for an audio book on or a Great Courses Plus lecture and listen to that and hear the information from another angle. Maybe give you something else to write your essays and projects on the basis of. Video. A lot of you are watching this on the video. Hi, camera. A lot of you are watching this on video. The good thing about video is that you can pause it. You can also watch it at 2 times speed. Say you've seen it already and the professor is speaking slowly and you're like, I just want to go faster. That's fine. The other thing you can do while watching video or listening to audio is you can combine it with other things that you need to do to feel that fit into like your lifestyle. A good example is like exercising. You can always listen to a podcast while you're exercising. Another thing that I want to mention is dictation. Dictation, specifically speech to text. Speech to text for writing first drafts. And I'm going to say shitty first drafts. There was a book by the wonderful writer Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird, which is a combined memoir and book about writing. And there's the famous chapter in there, you can probably find it for free online, called Shitty First Drafts. And the idea of a shitty first draft is you can put anything you want into the first draft because once it's down, it can only get better. You can spin that into that shit into gold. So over time, it becomes better and better and better with everything that you do to it. And one of the biggest ways in which we waste time when we write is by trying to make every sentence perfect the first time. And by using dictation, there are some good dictation apps. If it's not overly technical, Dragon Anywhere is good. But even just emailing yourself a document while you're writing, while you're walking or something, or even at your desk, we can write a lot faster than we type. Has anyone ever had that experience where they know what the next sentence and the sentence after that is going to be in their head, but their typing is so slow that by the time they get to that, even if you're a fast typer, by the way, but by the time you get to that sentence, you forgot what it was you were going to say, and you're like, oh, I had the perfect phrasing in mind, but I forgot it. But if you just said it, you would have it. If you just said it, you would have it. And so this is a great way to generate a lot of printable prose very quickly. I wrote a book last academic year. It's 117,000 words, and I would say that I dictated 70% of it on walks. I didn't have to, I went back through and corrected it, of course, because there was a lot of, there's a lot of weird stuff in there. Like, for some reason it thought that my last name, Lapomi, was Look Homey, and it thought that there are a couple of other really funny speech-to-text fails. And if you search on Twitter or X, Darren Lapomi speech-to-text fails, I have documented many of them. But anyway, neither here nor there. All right. Okay, dictation. Super, super good way to generate your draft prose. We talked a little bit about ChatGPT. I have a ChatGPT file. I have the paid version. I think it's a little bit better. 20 bucks a month. I don't want to make this an advertisement for OpenAI. The free version is plenty good for what most people need it for. But I have a file on every project that I am working on. And I will just go back and forth, like talking about ideas, questions that I have about the field. And it's remarkably detailed about things. I'm like, what lamella of the dorsal horn of the spinal column does the touch receptor in the right index finger synapse to? And it somehow knows. Something like that. And so you have a file for all your classes, and you ask it questions. You ask it for drill problems. There are a couple of things that I'm just going to go off in sort of rapid succession. There's the Pomodoro technique. Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. And there's a little kitchen timer that is made by a bunch of different companies that have been making these for 100 years. And you just twist the kitchen timer, you set it to 25 minutes, and you put away all distractions and you focus on one task. Then at the end of that 25 minutes, you set it again to 5 minutes, and you can do anything. You can take a break, you can watch 5 minutes of a movie, you can do anything during that time. Then sit back down, crack your knuckles, yuck, and you turn the Pomodoro again to 25 minutes, and then you go again. And then you do that cycle for 2 hours, so 4 cycles, and then you take a half-hour break. I have probably only done like ever 1.5 complete cycles, but then you take the half-hour break and you start over again. Now, who has the time for this? Sometimes you have time for it. Sometimes you have uninterrupted 2-hour breaks where you can do this. And you'd be shocked at how much you can do if you consciously eliminate these distractions and work for those chunks of time. So turn stuff off. When I was in college, we had AOL Instant Messenger, which is kind of like text messaging, but it was on a desktop computer. And I would get distracted by it, talking to people from high school and so on, and in the dorm room next door or whatever. And so I had this, for more than a year, I had this desktop background that was just 3 words, turn me off, which meant turn my computer all the way off, all the way down to nothing, so that it would take, back in those days, 90 seconds for it to boot back up again. So turning stuff off, create these like barriers to being distracted. Batch similar tasks. So in part because of my administrative role, I have a lot of meetings on my calendar. I have sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of meetings per day. And previously in my career, I would have seen a chunk of time on my calendar and said, I'm going to put that meeting right there, right in the middle, because it's free. It's an easy spot to put a meeting. But later on, I learned that it's better actually to put those tasks that take time away from your creative time or your work time where you need deep focus. Put all of the other things, the distracting things, back to back to back to back to back, because that leaves bigger chunks of time throughout the day. A lot of times we waste time because our calendars with other people don't sync up, and using the calendar invite feature on Google Calendar is really useful for that. And I'm getting a really low level now. Try to send as few emails as possible by putting all the information in up front. So if you want a letter of recommendation from a professor or from an employer, then put the due date and your resume and all the information in the first email. And chances are, like more than 50% of the time, they're going to say yes. And they would prefer not to have to email you back to get that information. So it does save, it allows you to get the ball rolling faster. Finally, use peer pressure and deadlines to your advantage. So if you have a meeting with a study group and they're going to expect you to come to that study group not to learn from them, but with you prepared to have a really good conversation about the material so you can enrich your understanding of it, use that peer pressure to your advantage so that you are inclined to do that work ahead of time. And then finally, use deadlines to your advantage. And I wouldn't say that you want to procrastinate on purpose, but we tend to work more efficiently when there's a little bit of pressure. So if there is some waypoint deadline, something before the deadline, like an internal deadline, like I have to have this done by then, I'm going to put it in my calendar for that time, that will provide sometimes the nudge you need to not, procrastinate on the full deadline, on like the external deadline, because you've been able to meet the internal deadline. That's where I'm going to stop. I hope at least some of this was useful, and I'm happy to take questions for 2 minutes.